Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Dr. Vanessa Brown, and I'm the moderator and host for this evening. And we are glad to have you here with us. And tonight, we are going to be talking about revisioning, reopening a way forward. And this is a new series that we've started. We've got some great pastors and theologians that are here with us. We're going to have some justice workers as we move further on into it, and activists. And we're excited to have this conversation. I want to thank Facebook Live. I want to thank YouTube and Twitter for being with us on tonight. And I ask that you continue to like and share this broadcast. I want to bring to you those guests so we can get right into the conversation on tonight. Our first guest, who is not really a guest because she's been here with us before on several occasions, Dr. Leslie D. Callahan. She is the senior pastor of St. Paul's Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Leslie, will you please open the mic and greet the people tonight?
Good evening. How are you, Dr. Brown? So good to be here.
Good to see you. Glad tonight to have Pastor Tim Wolfe. He is the senior pastor of Gather Faith Community, Austin Oak Park, Chicago, Illinois. And we're grateful that Pastor Tim is also a part of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries in the Midwest. And so we greet you, Pastor Tim. Come and greet the people for us, if you will.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much, Pastor. And last but certainly not least, she's not a guest. She helps us move this show along. Bishop Yvette Adrian Flunder. She's the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. Most importantly, she is the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California. Bishop Flunder, will you please greet the people and set a foundation for tonight's conversation?
Well, good evening, family. Everywhere you are, here in the United States, across this country, our family that's watching and participating from Mexico, some of you from Africa, you had to get up, wake up to be a part of this conversation today, but we're grateful to have you here. We have two incredible pastors with us today. One who is a founding pastor of the church that he was led to give birth to. The other who in so many ways came into a congregation at a critical time in the life of that congregation and has brought so much life and light to St. Paul. And she is also the mother of one of my babies. I love me some Bella, Mia Bella, as I call her. She's quite the personality, I have to tell you. Very much like her mama, if you want to know the truth. But I'm very
You'll probably
pleased.
see her at some point tonight.
I look forward to that. I do. I know she wouldn't miss seeing me. I know that. I am so pleased to have them here, and so pleased that this series is going to begin with these pastors in particular. You'll be hearing from pastors. We're going to make the effort not to have a whole lot of voices because we really want to hear thoroughly some of the things that these pastors and others have experienced. Myself, a pastor, Bishop-elect Vanessa, a pastor. It will feed us, and hopefully we can also feed the conversation. So we have some questions that we're all going to be able to share, and my prayer is that our audience will hear and also perhaps relate, but also experience in many ways the church universal. What is really happening? And what are we anticipating from the divine going forward? Welcome, family, everywhere get ready. They're going to be a great blessing to us tonight.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. And so, Dr. Leslie, Pastor Tim, I have a series of questions. There are 4 of them. And I'm going to ask you each individually about those questions. And I want you all to be honest and as candid as you can be as we move forward with it. And of course, Bishop Flunder will also jump in as well. And so, since we've been in the COVID, it's been at least definitely a year and several months, right? I'd like to know how you are faring. How are you doing? What in terms of your mental and emotional state of being, and even your physical state of being? How are you doing? And I'll start with Dr. Leslie Callahan.
Thank you for asking, Dr. Vanessa. I appreciate the question. I don't know that we always get asked that question. We get, I feel like lots of other questions are on the table, but I appreciate your asking. I will say that personally, it's been up and down. I am grateful to say that I've been physically well, but I am aware that the pandemic has taken a toll on my patients. We've talked a lot, most of us have been talking a lot about how the pandemic has been revelatory in terms of the things that we are learning about our world, about our society, about our nation, the things that got reinforced about some of the things that are terribly wrong. But it's also been revelatory, I think, for me personally. I'm not nearly as patient as I thought I was. So it's been up and down. I would say that I'm doing pretty well now. I feel like I feel a lot of gratitude to have come this far by faith. I feel like, I feel blessed that my daughter, we've just about gotten through 2nd grade. The at-home schooling, I say everywhere I go, I never intended to be an elementary school teacher, and there's a reason for that. But I would say that we have fared fairly well as a family. She made adequate yearly progress. She's learned the things she's supposed to learn in 1st and 2nd grade. And we've got to spend a lot of time together. So I'm very grateful for that. So I feel like I fared personally pretty well. I think if the question is also about the church, I don't know that we know. We are still very much in this limbo of not who we were and not quite yet who we're going to become. And I think that I don't know that we really know. We certainly are, we're managing to stay together. We are connected. I'm very appreciative of the leadership team at St. Paul's that's done a really good job of at least reaching out to our members and touching bases and being connected in that way. But I think how we really have fared, I don't know that we will really know until it's time just sort of to really come back out and to see how people are feeling and to see who does and who does not show back up, who drops off. I don't know that we know that. I know for sure that there's a lot of grieving ahead on the other side, wherever that is. I know there's a lot of grieving. I think that the reentry process, I appreciate this conversation because I think that reentry process is going to be more complicated and painful, frankly, than we have accounted for. So I don't think we know yet.
Thank you so much. And before Pastor Tim comes, I want to encourage Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter to answer the question as well in the chats and wherever you are. Please answer the question. Pastor Tim, will you answer the question for us?
Absolutely. And thank you all for letting me be part of this conversation. I'm honored to be in this company. I was talking for the first time since the pandemic began. My little group of gather a lot of us were able to assemble together outdoors to celebrate one of our own who finished his PhD this last week, and we were all together. And I said to them something that had not occurred to me until this moment arrived, which was when we went into this, we really had no guarantee who we would see coming out. We did not know. There was no guarantee, you know, that the last time we saw somebody, you know, there's that old church song, "This may be the last time." I don't know. We've sort of experienced that. And I think we have not yet absorbed the fullness of that. I think we've been able to focus on the losses, but I don't think we've been able to really understand the fullness of what the emotional sort of rigor that we all have gone through with this yet, because it turned into, well, maybe, I mean, for a lot of us, if you're like me, it turned into, we got to get through this. It's sort of every day became, okay, this is what's got to get done today. This is what's got to get done today. And when it began, my focus gathers an interesting place. We started as a hybrid church. And so as a consequence, our membership is really far flung. It is, we literally have people in Scotland and folks in Ghana and from California, from coast to coast. And so caring for them became an issue. And at the same time, we have a local sort of hub. And so I made it my business that's when really my pastoral mettle got tested. You know, this was not about preaching, and this was not about, you know, putting a service together. This was about really, really doing deep caregiving for folks. And that calls for a whole different set of muscles, I think. And as a result of that, I think what we learned how to get along really well and care for one another. Because what happened that I think is a real blessing is that we were not in a situation to go into an old hierarchy where it's like, you're in charge of this and you're in charge of this. It was like, everybody's got to pitch in. We've all got to look after each other. We've all got to care for one another. We can't all be all places at all times. And so there were a lot of times that I would call on members to check on other members. It's like, let them hear another voice. It should be all of us working together. And it bound our community together. It did not mean that we did not go through great strife. We had several members who dealt with COVID. Thank God they all came through. But it was traumatic for us to know that there were folks that were sick and struggling. One of our members who lives in Europe has long COVID, and so he's been dealing with tremendous fatigue and those kinds of things, and caring for him. We all learned how to use Amazon to send candy, you know, little gifts to him to just let him know that he's being thought of. And so there was a lot of that sort of thing that was going on. It became, personally, it became exhausting work, but it also became exhilarating work. And I think that's been my experience of ministry, period. Sometimes the things that ask the most of us are also the things that give us the greatest joy. And so it was a joy to deal with this. And at the same time, there was not a morning that I woke up looking for something to do. You know, I'm still trying to get on that retreat that I promised myself a year ago. You know, that's just not been able to happen. And so that's sort of where that goes. And I think a lot of us thought, okay, well, we're just going to learn how to paste together something for Sunday, or keep our Bible study, just going to kind of keep the drumbeat going until we can get back to normal. And I don't think a lot of us that were really doing that kind of pastoral care did not anticipate how much of the stuff was going to be not in the Bible studies and not in the worship and not in the fellowships and the big Zoom things. A lot of it was going to be in these one-on-ones that we were doing. I did a whole lot of walking with my local congregations from the beginning. It was like, I will stand on the sidewalk, you come down, we'll walk 6 feet apart, but we'll walk. And there was those kinds of ways of trying to make that work. In the meantime, God has been good to us, though. We've grown. Not numerically, yes, but that's not how we measure growth at Gather. We've grown spiritually, and our boundaries have expanded in terms of just our ability to really relate spiritually to one another, because there have been a lot of deep questions that have come up in the course of this. And this has not been about us just kind of skimming the surface on anything. And that's been the real blessing for us. So, yeah, it's been traumatic, and yeah, it's been hard, and I'm grateful that we came out of it intact. But I'm really grateful for what we've learned and how this has really been formative for us in many ways.
Thank you, Pastor Tim. Bishop Flunder, do you want to answer, or you want to add? You want to say something? You're muted, Mother.
Well, I think that I probably should answer the question, how am I faring? And with my pastor hat and my pastor of pastors hat, in a sense, I seem to be doing pretty good. I haven't punched anybody in the throat, and I think that that's an incredible, given some of the frustration that comes along with some of this. It's important that I say that I believe that I'm faring well. Um, I I lost my brother in the COVID, and I think that it added I know that it added a degree of intensifying the loss, because I think there's several kinds of bereavement that have occurred, not just the bereavement of the loss of people to death, but just the bereavement of some of the things that really do bring life to me on a personal level. And losing Leonard in many ways intensified a lot of that. I can honestly, openly say that. And I did have some reactions to it physically and emotionally. I was surrounded by people who prayed me through, and in some cases sent me some oxtails and rice and peas to wake up that part of me that needed to eat. That was a really important thing. I think also I made a note to myself when I asked the question to you all. I said, I'm not an extremely time conscious person. I truly am a Trinitarian Pentecostal. And I do believe in worship almost like a big party, that we just stay till we get ready to go, and if you want to leave, you can leave. If you want to stay, you can stay. Well, being relegated to virtual worship means that we got to have all this worship in a minute and a half. And that's a very different, not only am I away from my people physically, but we also have to order ourselves in a way that makes our online and virtual worship more palatable to those that we serve out there in the world. And that has gained for us a significant number of people that have joined us online. And I worry, a lot. I said, well, if we ever go back to church and we start having church till we get through, what's going to happen to the people that are used to us having, you understand what I'm saying, that kind of worship. So I do think that we're going to have to adapt something different in some ways. And I'm open and willing to do that. And again, I'm a very tactile person. And being without my people's bodies is troubling for me. I like to be hugged, and I like to hug, and I like to pick up my children and hold them myself. And I also have some four-legged children that come, the ones that do behave in the worship experience, and not having them around and not being able to touch them is viscerally complicated for me. And I am I'm open and honest about it, saying that. But I am also amazed at the way that I have been deeply, deeply loved and cared for in whatever ways people can do that virtually, both in the local church, throughout the fellowship, and across the world where people have cared for me. And I would just add one other thing. The planning side of me, because if you know me well, you know that I am constantly dreaming and visioning and planning. And because time is so uncertain in the COVID, it's hard to hard plan a year, 2 years, 3 years out, because you just don't know, what is exactly going to happen. You just don't know. And so the planning side of me at first was very frustrated because I couldn't concretize some of the things that I feel are my duty and responsibility to do in leadership. And I have found myself actually doing a lot better with saying, well, we'll have to try to see what happens, and we'll try for plan A. If plan A doesn't work, we'll go to plan B. If plan B doesn't work, we'll have to come up with a plan C or a B and a half. if you know what I'm saying. Just some kind of way to do what it is that we have structured for ourselves, out for 5 years or 7 years that we were going to do, that now we have to do so differently. And truthfully, beloved, that ain't all bad in terms of the flexibility that I think is needed for us not to become so religious and so organized that we miss the move of God. So that part of it blesses me. I try hard not to be so religious that I miss the move of God. But at the same time, because I have responsibilities, I'm planning and organizing and making dates and setting up things. I'm finding that I can let go of a lot of that and trust that somehow or other, the divine in the divine's divine way of doing things is going to help us to know in this process what to leave alone, perhaps never do again, and what really will keep. Like your grandmother used to put up preserves in curd jars downstairs in the basement. And I say, well, why do they have to be down here in the basement in the dark? And she used to say, because they need that in order to keep. I got it now. Some things have to be put in a jar and put in the basement so that they will keep until the time comes to use them. So that's probably my best answer to how I am doing. I am coming along, and honestly, I am grateful to God for the lessons that we have learned.
Thank you, Bishop. I want to read, because I think it's important that we read some of the remarks that people are making on Facebook. And so we have Demetria, whom I know is a member of CORE in Lancaster. She says, I agree. I don't think we will know how we feel about this pandemic until this is over, in the true sense of being over. Pastor Callahan summed it beautifully. Bishop Flunder also stated in her message on Sunday, when she preached at Rivers, that nothing will ever be the same. We are different and changed, still changing. So there's no way to really know how we feel until we get to where we are going. There are still so many changes and adjustments to be made until we get to this new thing that God is doing. Then we have a comment by Nicole Hernandez. We learn how to care for ourselves and demonstrate how we do not need anybody else in our lives. And then we have a message from, I believe she's a pastor, Cassandra Eileen Jones. It's been difficult, but our congregation has demonstrated caring and empathy in many, many ways throughout the illness and great loss. We are still worshiping virtually and planning how to safely to begin gathering again. And then Yvonne M. Williams Windsor, from people I have spoken to, they like Zoom and telecommunications. No hotel fee, driving tired and away from home. The church is still the church. We are the church. Condolences to you for your loss, Bishop Flunder. Amen. And so this brings me to my next question, Dr. Callahan. What have you learned during this pandemic? And not just one thing, you could be multiple things that you learned.
I've learned a lot. I've learned that there were gifts that were present in our congregation that we didn't know we needed, that emerged in the midst of the pandemic. That there were people, one thing in particular, there were people who really had a gift for the visual parts of worship and sort of helping us to create content that worked online, where the visual is more important than it is, or different. It's kind of differently situated. I learned how flexible. Turns out we were more flexible as a 130-year-old congregation at the time than you would have thought. I learned, I don't know if it's so much a learning or just a kind of transformation. I learned that the building, that I really could detach from the building in ways that if you'd asked me you know, how you feel about not being able to preach on Sunday in a pulpit for a year. I would have thought it would have been much more. I probably would have thought it was terrible, or maybe, I guess I would have known it was possible. I learned, to that point, I learned that all of those years when I was a teenager, still getting used to the call to ministry before I talked to anybody about it, all those years of preaching to myself in a mirror, turns out that was really good practice for this. And it came back right. And like the first time I did it, I was like, oh, this is just like, so I learned that, I had already said earlier, you know, I learned that my patience is not what I would have thought it was. I learned that our church's leadership capacity for faithfulness and caring for one another was really much more expansive than we knew. And that our capacity to stay connected to each other, it felt like meeting some members of the congregation that I've known for 12 years newly. Learned a lot about folks that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And I am sure, again, that in retrospect and hindsight, once this actually is in hindsight, I'm sure that there'll be lots of other learnings that to reflect on. But those are just a few that I'm already aware of.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Callahan. Pastor Tim, what did you learn?
I think that Pastor Leslie and I have been in some of the same school because I learned many of those same sorts of things. One of the things that Gather was never, we were in borrowed spaces, so we had no building attachment, which was a blessing, it turned out. What's very interesting about it, though, is just before the pandemic struck, we were doing our yearly planning meeting with our worship team, and they brought me a question because we'd sort of settled in one place that was on the western edge of the city. That's where our heart of ministry is locally, is in Chicago's on the west side. But they were taught, particularly our worship planners were saying, they just came and said, Pastor, you know, why don't we adopt the Jesus and Paul model? You know, they weren't settled. They moved around. And this is about the time that Kanye was doing all his little pop-up stuff, right? And they were like, we should think about Gather's worship becoming a pop-up where we get around this city, because this city is looking for us. And they're not going to drive all the way out to us to find us. People don't get in. It's not like the old days. You know, in the old days, we'd be like, oh, who's got the hot church? I remember when I lived in LA, whoever had the hot church, you got in your car, and if you drove 45 minutes to get down to Compton to where they were having church, you went down to Compton. Or if you had to drive out to West Covina, you went to West Covina. People don't do that anymore. And they're like, the church, Jesus understood that he had to take the church to the people, whether it was on a mountainside or in a village. He went to the people. We should be doing that. And so we had already sort of released ourselves from the idea of any physical anchorage. And the other challenge that we were struggling with was we had, by being a virtual church and a live church, a hybrid, we also were concerned about the fact that we were building this community virtually, and we didn't want to turn them into sort of, you know, observers. That was the big challenge. It's like, I don't want the folks that are tuning in from, you know, from Olympia, Washington, and New Hampshire to be looking and just say, oh, we just get to watch the people in Gather, you know, in Chicago have church. That loses its charm very quickly. And so when it was time to make the leap, we were conditioned already there was really nothing for us to grieve in the loss of a centralized space. That was a blessing to us. But we also were able to recognize and tap into, as Pastor Leslie said, the creativity of everybody in the congregation. And we realized that their participation in worship could not be just passive, that we were going to have to create opportunities every time we met for them to have some sort of role. And we were only worship, and to this day, we only do a worship service once a month. We do a weekly Bible study, but because the church is young, we're not interested in trying to imitate bigger churches who have staff and people to do that. You can exhaust your people, and there's nothing like having like, you know, 2 or 3 stinker services in a row where this one doesn't show up and that doesn't happen, to deflate the spirit of your people, right? You want everybody all hands on, everybody plugged in. And so we were working on a monthly service schedule anyway, but this became a huge idea of how many different ways can we get their faces and their voices, can we get their participation in, so that when we would go into the service, they would all be there and could see each other and hear each other's voices, whether they were wherever they were from. And what happened that was really wonderful was this family that had sort of been kind of, it was almost like a broadly extended family, right? It's like, I guess I got some cousins, you know, down there in New Mexico, and there's, you know, the core family, we're here in Chicago, but we got some cousins here, some cousins there. Everybody just began to really tighten up, so that they, oh, look at that, there you go, that's beautiful. And so what became evident to us was to continually press ourselves to create creative opportunities for the congregation. We never get, because in our church, communion is the centerpiece. It is our belief that the table is where this thing happens, because we are a church of reclamation for people that have suffered serious church hurt and exclusion and been told they're unworthy. And for us, the preacher can say it all day long, but when you open up the table and tell everybody to come on in, that's the moment. And so the big question for us was, how do we do that? You know, and so we decided we would just continue to have communion, but we would find different creative ways to do that. So some weeks we do it just a traditional intinction ways, and some months and other times we do these wonderful little video things where you look like you're bringing the cup in and you're actually taking it from someone and passing it on, and these sorts of little kind of visual things that brought the community together. So it's been for us a wonderful experience, because everybody who wants a creative voice, there's room for it. There's room for it. And I think coming out of that is going to be the ethos and the way Gather always works. We're going to always, because we built this big community online, we will never be able to step away. There will never be, we can't shut that down. And so there will always be, but what we're going to wind up doing is going into a live service on like the second Sunday of the month, doing our virtual service on the fourth Sunday. And it will be a way for us to blend and meet multiple different needs. All of that, though, I think the trademark for Gather will be live or virtual. It's about everybody pitching in. And so we sort of do handcrafted church. Everybody brings their best. And sometimes it's art, and sometimes it's music, and sometimes it's testimony, but everybody gets in. And it's a beautiful thing.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but and then of course somebody's driving down the street with their music loud. Something Pastor Tim just was saying that was part of the learning. I realized pretty quickly once we went online in the midst of the pandemic that we had been treating the folks who were watching online as if they were eavesdroppers, and we hadn't been attending to them. Not in an integrated way, not in an organic way, to invite them to participate. Because before the pandemic, in contrast to Pastor Tim, before the pandemic, the site was so important. I mean, we brand ourselves by our location, 10th and Wallace, 1000 Wallace Street, and so we weren't 2 weeks in before I realized that we couldn't go back to doing that we were missing an opportunity to actually engage people in worship rather than having them be spectators. So something that you talked about, what you said actually sparked that reminder for me of how strong that feeling is, that people who watch, I want to invite them to participate and to be part of what we're doing, to be part of worship, to be worshipers and participants.
And I think that goes, at Gather, we say, we're just not radically inclusive, we're ecstatically inclusive. You know, that gives us our greatest joy, is to have you all here. And we've been blessed. What's very interesting is that our congregation is made up of not just Christians. We got a lot of recovering Pentecostals, and we got a lot of recovering Catholics, and we got some UCC folk and all that. But we also have some Buddhists and some agnostics and some Jewish folk who come for this community, but also for the fact that their voices are always welcome. And however they want to find their way into this community is welcome. And what this did was it sort of magnified it, because it was also very intentional on their part. It wasn't just like we're in the room with these folks and we're going to sing along. It was like, no, I've got to get my little piece together. I've got to get it submitted so that I could be in the service. And it's sort of become this really wonderful, just sort of this great big old stew pot that we just, you don't know month to month how it's going to come out, but you put all the opportunities out there, and everybody who wants to play gets to play. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of our old structures had a tendency to elevate sort of your key players. There were the lead singers, and there were the deacons who knew how to do this, and there was, the mothers who knew how to pray, and they sort of rode that cream rose to the top, and everybody else just kind of got to sit there and enjoy that. And it was, listen, I'm an old Pentecostal, Bishop Flunder and I, we both go back to that stuff. I love being in a church where you got the folks that know how to pray, and the folks who know how to sing. But there's something in this new world that we're moving into that is not about the cream rising to the top. It's about the new wine. It's just everybody's getting fermented and everybody's coming together. And I really do see that happening at Gather and in other churches that are using this, letting what God is doing happen, as opposed to resisting it and trying to say, God, okay, you got us through this, but now we're going to go back and pick up where we left off. That's going to be a huge mistake for a lot of folks if they do that.
Bishop Flunder, what did you learn?
Lord have mercy. So much, okay, that I've heard. I won't repeat because I just want to say amen, amen, and amen. There are a couple of things, though. I learned to care for plants. I've always liked them and like to have them around me, but it was quite different learning to care for them. And now that I have become sort of a plant mother and a plant grandmother, because my daughter has also got a bunch of them, I talk to them. I grieve them when they die. And I have to say, I also kill them unintentionally and start over. I threaten some of them, and I tell them that I've done everything that the book said for me to do for you. If you do not live, we will go to the store and get another one just like you, just so that you'll know how this is going to work out. And I don't know whether it's the carbon dioxide that's coming out when I'm talking to them, but usually if I threaten them long enough, they seem to grab a hold and try to live. I haven't figured that out, what it is. But I do deal with them. I have to deal with them. And I learned something else. I learned how much, hold on just a moment. Can you get it? Hold on, mother's in the room. It's just music came in with it. Okay. I have learned also so much about how much I missed being away from Mother Miller when I was on the road, especially the last 3 or 4 years, when she couldn't travel with me. It was a real challenge. And then so when I got back home, I really realized that it was really problematic, for me emotionally and physically to be away from her. And being back with her sort of takes me back several years before I started traveling half the year at least, being able to be, just be together, to enjoy one another, to spend some time, to plan, to shop, to do things that are completely frivolous, that we just want to do, the sort of idiosyncratic things that got us together 37 years ago, It's a great joy to rediscover what those realities were really about. And more truth. I'm telling the truth a whole lot more often, frequently. Not because I lied about it, I just didn't talk about it. I didn't tell people the degree to which I like old bourbon. I just didn't, and sometimes people try to give me cheesy bourbon, and I feel real sorry for them and say, baby, look, It's got to be old. I like old bourbon. I like old rum. You understand what I'm saying? I wanted to have suffered.
Basil Hayden is best.
Basil Hayden. I'm going to just put a pause right there. Let it rest for just a minute. There's some joy in being able, as Tim said, Pastor Tim said, with my super Pentecostal self, which of course means that hidden away in my life somewhere are still closets. You know, closets where people have to try to figure out who we really are and figure out, you know, how we, you know, how do we roll in the world and figure it out and have this whole persona. I was raised like that, a whole persona. It's not that you don't live in the persona, you just don't expose it. You don't say anything. And at first we say it's for the people's good, but in reality, it really isn't for the people's good as much as it is for what we suspect is for our good. And when I started talking about old bourbon and old rum, my wonderful members started slipping me bags. Now you have to understand how that works. And they sort of roll up on me because they all Methodist too. So they roll up on me and say, now here, don't tell nobody about this. And you can tell by how we're talking to each other that it's got to be either something in a bottle or some drugs or something where they're giving it to me, you know. Now here, now put this somewhere. Well, can't nobody find it, you know. But my truth is, it has done some wonderful things to make us have a certain freedom that perhaps was not quite there, even with all the conversation about freedom that we have, you know. And I thank God for them because they make good choices. Hallelujah. And this last thing, Bishop-elect, I think I've learned to pastor together. I don't feel the weight of responsibility that I have felt. And I've heard that echoed in many ways since we've been talking tonight. I have found the pastoral skills in many of my people, some of which don't even have titles, that have pastored me and pastored in many ways our seniors and our people who are following from afar off, the worship and liturgy team that builds the services on Sunday, the follow-up and leadership who gets involved with member services. How beautiful it is to dwell together in unity in that way. And I thank God, which has given me the opportunity to learn again the importance of quality time. As much as I have learned to spend more time with my partner and my children, I have also learned to hibernate. And I'm a people person. And so hibernating is a challenge. It has been a challenge for me in life, but I've learned how to find a place in the same house for periods of time when I can be alone and enjoy that time immensely, you know, because it's very different than being on airplanes and trains. Just the whole time that it took to get where I was going and to get settled and then do the thing that I had to do sometime for 2 or 3 hours. I had to fly 6 hours to get there and then drive for 2 hours to be able to have time and allow myself the privilege of hibernation and self-time and being introspective, thinking things through, processing things, singing to myself, which I do perpetually, all alone by myself, you know, is a great blessing. So that has come too with this whole quarantine. You know, you got to like yourself and you got to be by yourself. Otherwise, you're going to really be in bad company. So anyway, there's that.
Thank you, Bishop Flunder, and to Dr. Callahan and Pastor Tim for your authenticity and transparency and honesty in answering these questions, because I know that it's speaking to the hearts of the people as well. And so much so, we have some comments. One from L. Stanley Davis. This is to the first question that I asked you all. He says, to answer the question which appears to be on the table, Bishop-elect Reverend Dr. Vanessa and Brown Church, as we have always known, it has radically changed and church as we have known it in my heart of hearts, I believe, will be no more. Then we have Desiree Frierson. I learned that we really, really need each other. The isolation, not to be able to fellowship in the ways we were accustomed to doing, was and is so emotionally impactful. And then we have Susu, also, who's a member of City of Refuge, said, I have learned truly nothing is always, and flexibility is key. I've also experienced the truth that acceptance is the bridge to humility. We are the church, not simply members. What gifts we all have. And then Cheryl Robinson Moore says, the pandemic has positioned me to be more intentional. Time is valuable and tomorrow is not guaranteed. I am learning in dynamic ways, quickly and completely, continually listening for God's creative voice. Amen. Amen to that. I want to go on to the next question, which is a very insightful question. And some of you may have an answer for that, and some of you may not. But it says, what will be different for your church when and if you reopen? And I'm going to start with Bishop Flunder.
You would do that. What will be different? I suspect, again, we'll probably have more abbreviated worship experiences. I suspect that will be true of us. I think that we will have simultaneous online and in-person worship because we have so many members now that cannot physically come. Back to what both Pastor Tim and Dr. Callahan have said. We have another bunch of folk, and it's very hard to do some of what we do virtually in a setting that is face to face. So I think we're going to have to shift. I think that is going to change. I think that we're going to be more intentional about how we affect our young people. And be more, I think we're going to have to be, because they're doing some things online that they did not do in our worship services. And what I'm finding out is how incredibly capable they are of so much. And I think we're going to have to be more intentional about that. We'll be different in that way. You know, I suspect that we will have more social connections. Something other than a mother's department and a father's department and a men's department and a women's department. But there are other connecting points, like all the entrepreneurs who get together, all the parents perhaps who get together. And there's other ways, and we can do that virtually, which is a great blessing. And what we are discovering is that people, I'm in San Francisco, Oakland, Bay Area, where the cost of living is hellishly high. And the fact that the only way people can live often is to not be in a metropolis center. They have to be around the edges of it, or they're piled up in a small space. You know, they have to come up with creative ways. But they are metropolis people in heart. And I think that we're going to have to design ways to effectively continue to reach out to people who cannot come, you know. The rest of it, Bishop-elect, in terms of the question is, I know God is up to some stuff. I can feel it in my spirit. I sense that we have shifted much more theologically than we even realize. I suspect there are things that we will never be able to preach again. Some things we'll never be able to say again. Some songs, some of the verses we'll never be able to sing again, you know, because we will be emerging, but also because we are the first fruits of this Reformation, as we are definitively in the midst of a full-scale, worldwide, multi-faith Reformation. There's no question about that, okay? And we have to expect that there are some things that are going to change that the divine has not revealed to us yet, because we ain't ready. We just wouldn't be able to be in agreement with her about this. You know, it's like you could tell somebody else. Don't tell me. I can't do that. But I think that that is part of what is the outcome. We lived to live again. It's not a shame for any of the ones who died. There's no judgment for any of the ones who either died from COVID or died from the many circumstances that this epidemic has created. Suicide, poverty, homelessness, joblessness. There are many ways that people died. They didn't die directly from the disease. But we lived, and I believe we lived in a sense of a resurrection from a death. We lived to live again. And we have to be prepared for it to be a completely different way to be. I'm listening for that part because I don't really have the answers. But as we go along in this exercise, the answers will begin to come. And I believe that what we'll do is continue to help one another.
Thank you, Bishop Flunder. Dr. Callahan.
I second so much of what Bishop Flunder said. I don't know the answer to the question. My instincts say that perhaps our services will be shorter, although I am mindful that our church commutes, that a lot of folks come to church, and it takes them quite a little while to get there. And it doesn't make sense for them to come there to take longer to get there than they are there. And so that fine tuning around now, so I don't know that we'll be shorter. I do know that if we are the same length as we used to be, it won't be because we are doing exactly what we used to do. We may decide that we want to stay a little while longer to make it worth the while of the people who come. But I suspect that we will be doing more of the things that we most missed in the midst of the pandemic, that have to do with, with socializing with one another and visiting with one another. But we won't go back, I don't think, to, in fact, I don't think anybody wants to go back to having announcements, right? Nobody liked them particularly even before the pandemic. And I think that we did them because people wouldn't show up if you didn't do them. Like, you couldn't put it in the bulletin. I mean, I think, Bishop Flunder and if you didn't already have your church, if you weren't already online, I think, so I think there certainly will be some changes around how we use time and in our in-person gatherings, and just much of what you've said is true. I can't quite imagine that we'll come out on the other side of this entirely comfortable with all of the physical interacting we have been doing. I can say for myself, I probably will never shake a hand again. A hug is a different thing. I will hug, but I'm pretty clear that I won't be shaking hands, maybe ever. And I suspect that, we might find ourselves normalizing wearing masks during flu season. And, there's some things that we actually could learn from this that might help us. I would actually like to see us normalizing some of those sorts of things. The recognition that, we can disrupt the transmission of things other than just COVID with mask wearing. And so, and we're going to have a much more robust online worship experience and presence. And we're going to continue to care for one another in the specific ways. I'll give you one example. Our deacons used to call our sick and shut-in members once a month. Now they call or text every member once a week. We're not going to go back to just contacting the sick and shut-in once a month. We're going to continue this process of having ongoing interaction, and the folks who are part of the congregation being able to count on being able to rely on some regular attention, specific just to say, hey, what's up? So.
That's great. Pastor Tim?
Oh, all of that, all of the above, right? That's all of it. And we're in very intentional conversations right now about what the next phase of this is for us. I want to go back to Stanley Davis's comment, though, about, church as we've known it has never been the same. Church as we've known it has only been around for about 100 years this way. And that's something that we need to be really ready for. One of the things that I'm, we've been, right now, my church is going through the whole history of Pentecost in our Bible study. And we kind of keep reminding them that great movements grow out of traumas. It is the Jesus movement itself. What happens in Acts, we're all going to preach Acts this coming Sunday, but what happened in Acts was a result of the trauma of what happened at the end of the Gospels with the crucifixion and the joy of the resurrection. We are going to come out with a different kind of intention. And one of the things that is going to be really, has changed for us and will never, ever leave us, I think, is that we have recognized that the boundaries between the church and the world, by sitting in this virtual environment, in this social media kind of space where we get our news and we find out whose birthday it is on Facebook and we get upset with what, I don't know, pick your celebrity has done last night, all that stuff. That's where our church lives. It's kind of the way the Spirit has kind of picked us up out of our cocoon and just dropped us in the world where we should have been all along. And so the question for us at Gather is, how do we use that sort of porousness online and when we move into live things to break down those barriers? I just don't know anybody, even the most, faithful church people, that are looking forward to getting up at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning and getting breakfast done and, getting on their Sunday clothes. And, there might be a nostalgia for some of that, but it's not the same thing. And we have all discovered that we can go to church in shorts and, put on a nice shirt and, sit here in our gym shorts, and God still moves and our souls still get fed and the word still goes forth, and so we're not going to be able to reverse that. But I think that's also, if I understand what happens in Acts, that's exactly what happened. They were regular temple goers, and all of a sudden they were in their homes, and all of a sudden they were in the streets, and they were working without, they were flying without a map. They were just going. The Spirit said, I love how in Acts, they just get up and they, go see that Ethiopian eunuch. What Ethiopian eunuch? And then no sooner as he finished with the baptized Ethiopian eunuch than poor Philip, he's already somewhere else. There is that kind of movement that comes whenever we are totally dependent on the leadership and the guidance of the Spirit of God. And so that's where we're pushing our church, is to say, we don't know. And it's okay not to know. We're going to see what God does. The one thing that we have done, and I'm really blessed that the Lord sent us some amazing musicians who are also well known in the house music community in Chicago. And if you know anything about house, you know that Chicago and house are synonymous. And so we've always made room in our worship for a house number. Well, every service ends with a dance number. And so one of the things that we're going to be moving into, and where we really feel our calling, particularly because there are so many LGBTQ young people who are beat up out of church, don't want nothing to do with the church, but they'll fill up the clubs. They get their praise on in the clubs. And the thing is, how do we draw some of those folks back into the church and make a sound that is familiar and welcoming to them there? And so what we're going to be moving into in our live services here in Chicago is trying to reach that community here in the city. And our service is going to be much more abbreviated, because young people don't have a lot of patience with form and fashion. They are not excited about 10, 20 minutes to get the choir in the choir stand. They're just not excited about that. And so in the middle of it, we're going to have a quick praise and worship set. I'm going to bring a word, 10 minutes. I keep myself to 20 minutes online just because I know that people are going to start reading their email if I preach longer than that. And it's like, so bring a quick word, and then we're going to turn the tables on and let people dance, do communion and let people dance, and do that as a way of drawing a new community and drawing back folks that, I live in Boys Town in Chicago. I've been in enough clubs and met enough of the saints that I knew from this church and that church in the clubs on Saturday night. And you know what? Let's find them, because they're not going to go back to the pews. And so that's been that's the heart and soul of what's going on at Gather is, since we've been disrupted, let's make the most of this disruption. Let's not try, let's understand, not ask what used to work and how can we make what used to work fit this new paradigm, but what is God saying to us in this new paradigm? What are these doors that are being opened to us for us to try new things? And the wonderful thing is, one of my UCC pastor friends here in the city, she's wonderful, and she just keeps reminding us, Tim, it's just church. And I think a lot of us got hooked up in this idea that we were online and we got to do showbiz, right? And we found out that they can't even pull off the Oscars virtually, but we were trying to do all these fabulous things with our service. It's still just church. These are people getting together with a heart of praise and worship and a concern for one another. And if you stay true to that, however you make that happen, and whatever your dialect, that's the wrong word for it, there's a better word for it, but whatever your language is that you're going to use, whatever God has given you to use and to speak to your people, go there. Now's your chance. All that time you've been sitting saying, I wish if we could just get out of this thing, now's your chance. Just go for it. And you're going to lose some folks along the way. But that's okay, because Bishop Flunder doesn't remember this, but early in our friendship, we had a conversation that very few people that Jesus healed joined the movement. They came and got what they needed, and they just kept going. And there is something really for us to know about that. And I think that as we move into this space, making the most out of what we've learned and how to do church in this venue, which is, we should not let those lessons go, but we should also, when we turn ourselves to how do we become go back to a live meeting, we need to say, all right, what can we throw away? What can we just get rid of? And Pastor Leslie, I agree with you. Everybody that's got a function doesn't need to come to the pulpit on Sunday and tell you all about it. Just let that go. They can find it online. Let's go. And let's do what we need to do to meet the needs of the people that we have not been able to reach. I don't want a church made of people that come to my church from other people's churches. That's not changing the world. That's just changing seats. I don't want folks changing seats. I want to find those people that have left the church or have never discovered the church. And for that, I got to come a different way. We know we got to come a different way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pastor Tim. Thank you, Bishop Flunder. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. We have a comment from Dr. Shakima North. She says, so many churches are not going to survive long past the pandemic. We know that this is true, right? As Bishop Flunder said, we are not going to come out the same. We are going to come out differently. And some people are going to make a decision that church is just not for them anymore. And that's not what they're going to do, right? L. Stanley Davis said, it's not necessarily about a membership as much as it is about a relationship. That is a valuable lesson to be learned from out of this pandemic experience. So we thank you for that. And this is the bonus question I'm going to ask all three of you all. This is the last question. And it's simply, if you had money, no, that's not what it says. If money and church denominational requirements were no object, what would be your ministry dream come true? Let me say it again. If money and church denominational requirements were no object, what would be your ministry dream come true? And I'm going to give you like a few seconds to just ponder, and then I'm going to call the first person. I can see it's deep thinking going on. Before I do that, Bishop-elect Sonia Williams says folk had to die in the desert before they went into the promised land. And that is, yes. Yeah. All right, Pastor Tim Wolfe.
Now, see, I knew you were going to do that. If money were no limit, and right now, Gather, we're in a conversation with the UCC, but we don't really have a lot of denominational constraints placed on us. I would love for all of these little sprouts of communities that are popping up, of folks that claim Gather, a family over here, a little cluster folk over there. I would love to be able to hand them seed money and say, now let's figure out how you're going to reach the communities you live in as well. in a way that is impossible for us. We can't get to all the places where we're represented. I've got folks that live in New Mexico in Navajo communities. How can we give you, what would gather look like in that context? Let's give you some money. Let's go figure out. That's what I would be spending the money for, was just to have, not to create a denomination, because I wouldn't expect any one of them to even, they would be in conversation with each other by familial lineage, but not by even, they'd all be different. But it would just be a way for us to do the vision that God gave Gather to from the beginning, which was, you know what, there are, this is a ministry for the walking wounded. And we talk about the walking wounded a lot. And they're not just in Chicago, and they're not just in, you know, Atlanta, or what, they're everywhere. So let's go opening effectively. Who was it, Aquinas, or was it Augustine, I think, that said that churches are really hospitals. They really are. And if we were to be able to do that and set up effectively a spiritual health care system that would compare with anybody else's systems, that here you go. Y'all take what you need. Let's get you the education you all need to grow and to be able to lead. Let's get you the people you need. Let's get you the funding you need. That's what I do with the money. That's where we want to be. I would much rather see 20 churches of 20 solid people that would touch in thousands of lives be all over the country than Gather never really, it's never been our vision that, you know, you're going to go in and we're going to put on one of these shows for you in these mega churches where we turn all the lights out. Nobody can see anybody because, you know, the band's playing. That's not what we're looking for. We're not ever going to aim for that.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Dr. Leslie.
Oh, it's a wonderful question. I think the thing I learned from the question is I need the Lord to help me to imagine what I would do if money were no object. This probably wouldn't be the end. In fact, I know it wouldn't be the end, but I would start. Well, one thing I didn't mention is about a difficult learning. It's actually something I knew, but you know, if you leave a building for a year, it's like the building knows you left it, and it starts to fall apart. And it's not that you know, our building was kind of, our buildings needed some work anyway, but the level of deterioration in our absence is just enormous. So what I would do is I would start by repurposing all of what we already have into I would start by repurposing it into various kinds of communal space, with community being more broadly defined. Some of it I would turn into affordable housing. Some of it I would turn into spaces. I'd have to figure out whether I thought I wanted it to be a formal educational space like a school, or whether something else that's maybe something more informal. Because one of the things that I've learned in the midst of the pandemic is that this I learned doing schooling with my daughter, that process needs to be much more individual than it is. And I think a number of children who had parents who could attend to it, who were at home and present, and teachers who were creative, found themselves thriving educationally because they had a more, and this is true for Bella, what I was able to do with her in concert with her online teachers was to figure out what it took for her to learn things, for her specifically to learn things. And so a space where we figured out how to make it possible for the young people in our community to learn the things they need to know, both educationally and socially and otherwise. So I would repurpose the space that we have and give very little attention to its being a space for worship, and much more attention to communal gathering in other ways and for other purposes.
Thank you, Dr. Leslie. Bishop Flunder.
Well, amen to both of what I've heard tonight. my organizing and planning brain just took off. Because the vision that Pastor Leslie lifted up is so like the campus that is City of Refuge, that basically is all sorts of things. You've all been here, so you know. And now we're adding more things and now having a conversation about housing. And if we really get to talking about it, I know that means that the likelihood is that we're pregnant with it. And there's some other things that would, but where the church would be simply the place where a church meets. Essentially that part of the building that is best suited for us to meet as a church. But other than that, you'd never be able to look at it and know that that's what it is. So that there would be, continue to be that kind of vanillaed out opportunities for whatever the mission is, to be able to say to the building, this is the room that I'm going to be in to do this work. So I know that vision and I encourage that. I think that as I see us kind of emerging, if money were no object, I would also kind of move to the idea of us finding ways to mingle much more with unchurched people, to Pastor Tim's concept, that we go ahead on and have social events. And we say, well, we church people, we don't do that. But when I was coming along in the church, everybody married or got with somebody that they met at the musicals or one of the convocations or something. I mean, that was where folks got to know who was eligible and who wasn't eligible. And your mamas and aunties and uncles all got involved in it, trying to tell you, he's a good boy, he did. Or she's a fine young woman. Y'all need to think about. And most all of the families that are now second, third generations from when my family started here in California, they're all intermarried. All kinds of different kind of ways. They married each other's sons and daughters and nieces and nephews. And we all found each other at the midnight musicals and the late night church services. We go there for church, but we'd leave there with somebody's phone number and chit chat. And it turned into things, and I think that being honest about that and truthful about that is to create what I call glass walls between church and society. We're not that much different. We just have a different group of people. And I think we would grow much better if we were not spiritually, what's the word when you have children of your own family members? You're incestuous. If we're not spiritually incestuous or theologically incestuous, such that we could grow outside of the spheres and relationships where we all do the same thing. We all cook the same way. We all think the same way. And even progressives can be incestuous. And what can we do to broaden that? And I say often, I would love for revelations to come and opportunities, fiscal opportunities, to create the glass walls that make us easily see out to society, make society easily see into the closed society that is church, and where we talk so much about wanting to be broader in our thinking, but we do it inside the walls that people can't see into if they're not visiting us or they're not members or connected in some way. How do we turn those into glass walls? How do we find love and light at parties where it's not all just us? I mean, I think that is kind of weird. So I would like to talk to people. It's a broad conversation. How do we create these glass walls where we can see out and people can see in? And let's keep going until we actually roll them back, the walls, and people come in easily and out easily, and we cross-pollinate all of our lives, like Billy's been doing, Get that connection of me in the church and me on the stage, me acquainted with my acquainted with my what's the young man's name that wears the dresses that really wears them?
Billy Porter.
Yeah, that Porter's his last name. He's brought you church. He has brought you the walk as it relates to, you know, the RuPaul way down the you know, the stroll, you know, and yeah, the ballroom and house together, that and the church as ballroom and house.
That's right.
And let's just be clear, the church has its own form of
Yes,
ballroom and house.
Yes.
Where else does anybody wear those costumes? Where else does anybody wear a 20-gallon hat? Except the church. Where else? And you can't just go down the street like that. You know, they'd pick you up. It's a whole total different thing when we see the comparisons and the similarities, and we move the wall that judges from the outside in and the inside out. I would love to be able to have conferences about that. I would love for us to be able to do experimental efforts at what that would really be like. I would love to bring the house culture to the church and the church to the house culture. You know, I would love for us to not feel that we are in some way enemies. I'd like for us to stop. I would like for us to stop thinking that what sorors do, what sororities and fraternities do, is somehow something other than who we are as a community. There are so many parts of this, but it all has to do with the glass wall. For me, I would create and work with people who want to create a permeable, invisible, well, to end and create, to create permeable and end this existing reality of a wall between all of us doing the same thing with other names and in other ways, but it is truly the same thing in many ways, right? Find the common denominators and come together more powerfully. And then I'll end with this, Bishop Vanessa. Folks need Sundays, some of them. Some of these young marrieds and folks that I deal with, young couples, straight and gay, who are now having children, because a lot of our people have children, lots of children. And they need Sundays. They work Monday through Friday, and on Saturday, they clean up and they try to do something. And I know a lot of couples that are having problems right now because they used to go to work and be away from each other all day, and the COVID has got them seeing each other, and they find out that they like the evening each other, but they don't like the daytime each other. That makes some sense. And they almost have to get acquainted with the daytime person, because it's like, you know, I could deal with you from like 6 or 7 o'clock until tomorrow morning. You know what I mean? But you all day is not what I, you know. And even if I didn't have a side chick or something like that, my job was my side chick. You know what I mean? And I'm not really enjoying seeing you all the time. So I think that people do need Sundays in some situations, both for the socialization that Pastor Leslie lifted up, the socialization of being with the church family. But also there are people that need the socialization of being with their families because they're away from their families all week long. So I think it will be a both and it's going to take a little while for us to create a way for that both and to happen. It's going to take some money and some effort to have a real, genuine, authentic both and, where they are enjoying, again, Pastor Leslie's conversation about their money's worth for coming to worship on Sundays. And simultaneously, the people who are now experiencing growth in their families, in their relationships, in their recreational needs, their rest, their Sabbat, you know, their rest on Sundays, can have an authentic worship service. There's something in the middle that we haven't figured out yet. And I think we're going to have to spend some time. We had the money, We would do the studies, we do the experimental realities, we would bear it up, hold it up, get the technology, because that's what the money's going to take. That's what the change is going to take, the technology, and it takes money to buy the kinds of things, to have the kind of virtual realities that will be fulfilling and long lasting. So obviously I've been thinking about it. And as we keep talking, my prayer is that others will join us, even in the chat, who may have some answers, some connections, some ways that we as a community of people working together can even more thoroughly address these issues. But we're going to keep talking. Now that we are going to do. We're going to keep talking about it, because this cross-pollination is where vision comes. I have heard so much tonight that I'm going to implement. I want you to know now you're going to see your stuff happening in my church. God bless you. And I love you with the love of Jesus. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I just wanted to make a comment by Sean Jenkins. He says, if there is to be a conference on house, culture, and the church, they have a direct connection to Ann Nesby and DJ Cedric, which we have a connection to him. He's done some of our parties for TFAM. I think this is a true need in the LGBT community of color, and it absolutely is. Absolutely. Thank you, Sean, and I will be in touch with you as well. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. Thank you, Pastor Tim, for
so much.
and Bishop Flunder for sharing and enlightening the people and sharing your heart and being transparent and authentic. It was wonderful. I know the people got a lot out of it. And we're going to do this as a series. We're going to hear from more pastors and more justice workers and more educators and so many other people that will come and also answer the same questions. But we thank you for being able to really, really share your hearts tonight. You all are great pastors.
Thank you, beloved. I love you so much.
I know your members are proud.
It's been a joy.
Indeed.
Yes, it's good.
Good to meet you, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, it's nice to be with you too. Amen.
So Bishop Flunder, we're gonna do our first announcement, and we're gonna ask that you do it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight on Beyond the Gatekeepers. We want to encourage you to continue to support us, continue to support the costs that are associated with Beyond the Gatekeepers. If we have been a blessing to you, if you are hearing things, if you're growing, if you're expanding, if your questions and answers are coming even more and more, and they are a blessing to your life, your ministry, your entrepreneurial outreaches, whatever you are doing, please send a donation. Nothing's too great and nothing is too small via Cash App to $TFAM Annual. That's $TFAM ANNUAL, or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. I encourage you, be a financial blessing, and many, many thanks to those who continually and faithfully contribute to keeping Beyond the Gatekeepers on, as the old folks used to say, on the air and available. God bless each of you, and thank you again for your generosity.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. We have a few more announcements, and we thank God for Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams and RIM Fellowship UCC, who advertise with us consistently. Welcome home, RIM Fellowship UCC, a radically inspired movement. And the church is in Atlanta, and you can go to www.rimatlanta.org. Every Sunday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will find them in their location. And they have forms of giving, $RIM Church. They have their Facebook page. You can find them RIM Fellowship UCC. Their Instagram page is RIM Fellowship, and YouTube is RIM Fellowship UCC. So we're grateful for that. If you're ever in the Atlanta area and you need somewhere to worship, please look for Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams and RIM Fellowship United Church of Christ. Also a consistent advertiser, Nubian Flunder. She's the daughter of Bishop Flunder, and she has her own company. It's called the Healing Place Apothecary, and you can find her products online. You can go to www.thp, which stands for the Healing Place, apothecary.com if you want to purchase some of the things that she has. I swear by the rose water and the daily greens. Juneteenth is coming up really, really soon. We want to give you the opportunity to purchase t-shirts for Juneteenth through Sky Michelle's Teas and Things. And she is a 7-year-old entrepreneur. You can go to her website at www.skymichelle.com. All items can be customized. And if you order within a sufficient time, you can have your t-shirts for Juneteenth. We have a plethora of them, and they are listed online as well. Also, Kara Solutions, we thank God for Pastor Sue Webley, who is our tech person for our church, but for Beyond the Gatekeepers and so many other churches and so many other businesses. And so focus on your passion, let Kara handle the rest. Administrative, business, and consulting services for dreamers, visionaries, entrepreneurs, faith, and community-based organizations. Please go to www.kara-solutions.com. That's www.kara-solutions.com. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, please email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's Beyond the Gatekeepers with an S show@gmail.com. Certainly, we thank you for joining us on tonight. We ask that you please, as Bishop Flunder has already forestated, support our broadcast by sending a donation to our Cash App, which is $TFAM annual, or to our PayPal, which is paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Thank you.